Happy Friday, folks. Well, like, I have to say one thing. I am very happy that I'm not an Arizona Cardinals fan. Not that I watched the NFL yesterday because I was up in Toronto at the Penguins Leafs game, but the Cardinals are so bad that they have fired their offensive coordinator after six games.
Yeah.
And they fired and they brought in a guy who's never been a coordinator before, actually a former NFL quarterback, Byron Leftwich. So it's
I remember Leftwich. That's not good for Josh Rosen, though. As a brand new quarterback, that's the worst thing that can happen.
What's interesting about that firing is, and I wrote a story, as everyone knows, I'm doing some football this year too, and I just did a story about the fact that in college football we've had three major programs get rid of a coordinator mid-season, which didn't happen before. I mean, it happened occasionally, but once a year was a lot, and now we've had three, and I think that kind of shows that the pressure now on the coordinators has, increased dramatically. Like everybody kind of understands of their importance to, either the offense or the defense.
No, that's true. That's a fair point.
What's interesting about it too is that who they bring in, and football, particularly in the United States, there's a very deep talent pool of people with knowledge and experience who may not always be working. And, to bring in someone in this situation, if it was desperate enough to make that move and then go this route of bringing in basically someone who's never held the role before, that's the more curious part to me, because there's someone you can coax out of retirement who's sitting on the sidelines, so to speak, looking for another opportunity.
Well, after the pre-show, let's touch back on that, because I want to talk about the talent pool for coaches in the NHL. Russ, go ahead.
All right. So yesterday, not too long after the show, went to let Perla out in the yard and heard one of my cats. I have a cat who's deaf, Anna. You've seen her; she's white, yelling. And I'm like, "Where the hell is she?" So I'm looking around, and I really can't find her for like 3 minutes. And then I realize she's high up in the highest tree we have, and beyond what like an extendo ladder can do. So I climbed up to the roof of my garage, and could see her, and that's probably 10 feet off the ground, and I could see her, but she doesn't want to try and jump to me, and there's no way I could put a ladder on there or try and reach her, because the drop would definitely break bones. There's no question about it. So I had to call the fire department. And I know people think, like, in this day and age, like, really, is a fire department going to really come out? And so I called the police non-emergency, because the fire department didn't have a direct line, and they came out with like a 35-foot ladder. And this tree needs a little trimming, and my tree guy's late getting here, so there's a branch that's not fully alive. And so they're leaning the ladder against that, and a woman, climbed up, had to get the cat and come down. And, it's a windy day, and the ladder is moving. And, boy, I got to tell you, very, very gutsy. I was worried because my cat had gotten to the point where he was on this one branch that is clearly just a branch that grew over the summer. And she doesn't weigh much, but it was swaying in the wind. And she's, 15 feet off the ground at that point. But when I first saw her, she was about 30 feet off the ground. So a little scary there.
Yeah, and especially with the tree, like, we're getting to that part of the year, like, it's starting to get windy outside here in Buffalo, and there is a tree on our street that has been dead for about 3 years, but the house is sort of semi-vacant. Older people who have been put in a senior facility, and we called the town because when the winds start whipping up here, branches are going to be flying off this tree because it's dead. It's brittle. It's good. And of course, I have to park my car right under this tree. I can just see a branch sticking right through the moonroof of my car.
Yeah.
But they can't do anything without the say so of the people across the street. So it's, anyway. Okay. I just had to bring that up when I heard the tree stuff, the tree part.
Well, if you remember, a tree branch did go through my car last summer, and it was in the shop for like a month and a half.
But we are all glad that Anna is okay.
Yeah, she's fine.
Okay, let's get the show started. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Friday, October 19th, 2018.
I'm Peter Tessier out here in Winnipeg.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
Kevin Allen of USA Today Sports.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Let's start with what we were just talking about before, the tree and the cat stories.
Back when I jinxed Austin Matthews.
Yeah, let's start with that, and we'll get to the coaching.
So I wrote this story. I thought it was kind of a fun story, and the premise of it was, obviously I've covered the league a long time, and I remember the days, obviously, of Gretzky and Mario Lemieux, and the fun part of being a fan in that era was, you really looked forward, because we obviously back then couldn't, watch hockey the way we can now. It wasn't readily available, so it was always you being able to look and find the box score to see whether or not, Wayne Gretzky scored a goal. I mean, I'm talking about, in the years when he was, he got his 92 goals, or even Brett Hull. And what the Austin Matthews great start reminded me of is sort of a return to that. Like, I think, in this next game, there's going to be a lot of people that, even if they don't have any love for the Maple Leafs, are going to tune in just to see, did he get a goal? Is he still on that base? And I thought, sort of, like, I'm not saying he was going to get 92 goals, but I thought it was kind of a return to that time when you can sort of debate or wonder how many goals he was going to get. And so, sure enough, I write that story up, and I got a lot of people quoted, and a lot of people read the story. And then that night, of course, he runs into a hot Penguins team that plays very well and beats the Maple Leafs, and nobody scores on the Maple Leafs, which is just incredible. So, as always, I was talking to one of my friends at USA Today, and he goes, you just have this effect on players. You write about them, and they go into jail. So
I don't believe that's true. Otherwise, I think you'd be out of the profession. You've been at it so long. I think some of the great players would have figured it out by now.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I do. I wish he would have scored, because I think it's good for the game when you get a player like that, when everybody just wants to see, well, how did he do last night? So.
And you know what? The thing is, and I really like Austin Matthews. I like his personality. He's a very friendly guy, but he's very sort of understated. And somebody asked him about the 7-game multi-point streak that he had, that it was snapped, and he was. I mean, maybe internally he's, miffed that it ended, but it's like, I care more about the team winning. And he was just sort of like nonplussed about it. He really wasn't like upset about it. I mean, he's not going to keep up this pace. He's leading the league with 10 goals. He's got 16 points in 8 games. He's not going to score 164 points. So I think he's, realistic.
Well, what's sad about this, though, is this is just a running beef with me. And, you and I have gone into it a little before, because I wonder when it was, and maybe Russ could address this too, because I started to think about this. When was the point where it stopped being fun, like sports, and it became so serious that, like, even when you write a story about that, you will have people that say, I can't believe you're writing about this, that, he's not going to get 90 goals. Well, of course, I never said he was going to get 90 goals, but like, when did the fun sort of leave sports, where everything becomes such a big issue that you can't just let anything go? Like, when did that happen? Was it the 90s, or?
I think it was late 80s, like 88, 89, right? There was a time in the mid 80s where I felt like that was still around, and then not that far after, I felt we got to that point.
I mean, is it the concern of bulletin board material? Is that what it is? I mean,
I don't mean that. I mean, it's just the fan base. Like, like it was big when I was a kid. Like, everybody had their favorite players, and there was a lot of arguing, but it was always, kind of a fun-based argument. Like, you at the end of it, you'd take your hand and go, you don't know what you're talking about. But it's not like that anymore. Now people really, get upset. I mean, they get, there's venom. I
mean, just last week, when there was talk, obviously with Matthews' start, has he come up to what McDavid is? And I remember there was Jim Matheson in the Edmonton Journal, I believe, who, basically called it some sort of like Toronto delusional syndrome, that was the case. And the thing is that like yesterday, one of the reporters asked Mike Babcock about the comparison. The reporter didn't even bring up Matthews. Asked to compare McDavid to Crosby, which has been an ongoing debate. And we know Crosby is 31 and McDavid's 22 or 23 at the oldest. And Babcock said, there's to me, and basically to me, there's no debate. One guy's got 2 gold medals and 3 Stanley Cups, and the other one doesn't.
Well,
and that's where you ended it.
It always depends on what this is why I always make people qualify it as, if you're going to say who's the best player in the league, well, I take, to me, that talks about credentials, and Crosby has the best credentials. If you're talking about the most talented player in the league, okay, then I think it's Connor McDavid at this point in his career. He's an amazingly talented guy, and it just depends on exactly how you define the criteria. But Babcock's absolutely right. How can you say that Crosby's not the best player in the world just based on credentials? But I think sometimes when people say who's the best player, I think they're talking about who's the most talented.
Sure, I could pinpoint, guys, the time frame too for what you were talking about, Kev, because in like 86, 87, WFAN started Sports Talk Radio, right? And so then people had a place to really chime in with opinions. And by like 90, 91, when Bud Harrelson was the manager of the Mets, he actually had a show on FAN, and he quit because he couldn't take the criticism from the callers and the fans and everything. So he just stopped doing it. And that was the first time like any of those call-in coaches ever like refused to do it. And now it happens, quite regularly. And I think Sports Talk Radio in every market now is to blame.
Russ, that was basically, back in the day when Scotty Bowman was in Buffalo, he did a show, like a weekly show with the late Ted Darling on one of the radio stations. But the thing was, and he took calls, but the thing was, they were all softballs. They were all like, tell us about this prospect up in the Western Hockey League or whatever.
Yeah.
Now coaches, they go on FAN, but they don't take calls because they know the fans are loose cannons, and they're gonna say, why do you suck so bad or something like that. Now, Peter, you were a witness to the greatness of McDavid earlier this week when you didn't get a chance to expand on it, and that was sort of they won a game against the Rangers on the weekend, and they started 0-2, but they were down 4-1 to Winnipeg, and I texted you and I says, they're toast. They're playing terrible. And then all of a sudden, McDavid just put him on his back, and they win 5-4. Yeah. And it was McDavid. It wasn't anybody else. It was McDavid. It was all McDavid.
Yeah, it was. And I think he is such an intimidating player to play against, not because he's Connor McDavid. It's just that you don't know what is going to happen when he gets the puck, because anything could happen. Right. And it's different than facing a Crosby, than facing an Ovechkin, than facing a Malkin, these generational type guys who are different. McDavid is still, like, we haven't seen all his tricks. We haven't seen everything yet from this guy. And he's still, we know what you get with Crosby now. There's still incredibleness, but we understand what Sidney Crosby could do. But David, we're still figuring out. Jacob Trouba is still probably wondering what happened on Tuesday night. Like, that's like, he's still probably sitting there going, what went wrong? And it's, that's the beauty of McDavid. And we talked about this, I think it was yesterday too. As long as McDavid can put that team on his back, Todd McClellan's probably safe. And I know Russ and I were sort of expounding on that. And he should be safe. And the Oilers are an awful team.
Yeah.
Don't make no mistake about that. There are holes in that lineup. There is problems. And
Tyrone got hurt last night, so that won't make it better.
I don't think Todd McClellan can coach away those weaknesses, but Connor McDavid, when he's on, can make those weaknesses go away. So back to your point of what's, these discussion points. These are the things now where everything's changed, and it's become, the sort of, I want to use my data to back up what's right about what we know about players. That's the other part that's come around in all of this, is that you can't just sit and have the water cooler talk anymore of Gretzky Lemieux, right? Mm-hmm. Everything is now, we've got to back this up by this, and this, and the way you look at it is wrong, and therefore you shouldn't even be talking. That's the hostility points in a lot of these things, discussions around sports, right? That's why coaches probably don't want to take phone calls, is because all of a sudden, the change in media over the last 25 years has given everyone the ability to not just be an armchair GM, but to have a whole lot of data and input into stuff in the discussion, I wouldn't want to listen to it either.
Yeah, I will tell you this too. There's something greater about McDavid than even what he does on the ice, and that if you look around in other sports, as an example, and I don't dislike LeBron James, but he does the rosin thing at the beginning. I don't know. Does he shoot water out of his mouth? He probably does.
No, he doesn't do the Triple H thing. No.
Yeah, I'm kidding. He definitely makes faces when he dunks and all those things. I've never seen McDavid do anything like that in any game, and he's got plenty of opportunities to do it too.
Hell, the most controversial thing he's ever done is what he said a couple days ago about I didn't see the entire context of the discussion, but he talked positively about, the effects of cannabis with the legalization of marijuana in Canada. And not to say that he was advocating it, but I mean, he talked about it, and I was like, okay, well, I mean, because he's, again, Crosby, McDavid, Matthews, and this goes to your point, Kevin, they're not going to be controversial. They're not going to go out on a limb. That's not what they're going to do. They've been.
Yeah, it's not this sports culture. They don't do that. But, on one hand, I think there's a lot of people, myself included, who appreciates the fact that, we're kind of a team-oriented sport. On the other hand, I think it does hold us back. I mean, as a reporter, I remember covering the NBA during the lockout one year, and I loved covering the NBA because the guys are so honest. Like, they're not fearful. They say what comes to their mind, and
there's so many fewer jobs. Like their jobs are pretty safe if you're a good one.
Yeah. But what is interesting, and maybe this is something we should discuss because I think it is fascinating. The one thing about the great players in NHL history is there was something about them that you'll always going to remember. Like, Gretzky was a thinker, and on the ice, and he was a dazzling passer and so memorable. And what a dominant one-on-one performer Mario Lemieux was. And Bobby Orr, of course, could go end out. And Brett Hull, had the great snapshot and quick release and everything else. Connor McDavid fits in that vein. There's a wow factor about McDavid when he plays that you go, wow, the great acceleration and the speed and the ability to roar by. Crosby is unlike all those guys.
Yeah.
Like when you think about it, there's the distinguishing aspect of Crosby is his greatness, but it's hard to define exactly, what it is that has made Crosby great. I mean, to me, and that's what sort of special is that he just, when the game's on the line, he's been able to rise up. When he needed to make the play, he has made the play. And it's not like
guys, Kev, he just wants to be better than you. And he wants to be better than anybody that's on the ice, and that drives him.
It does. And I think that's his greatness, is that he's been able to always rise up and get things done. But, he doesn't have that distinguishing characteristic that he's hard to describe his greatness, where, Messier, it was his intimidation, his physical, the glare, and with Crosby, it's hard to do. Where McDavid sort of fits the mold of our other stars where, for the most part, I think with every superstar, Rocco Richard, we talk about a shot, there's just everything.
For Crosby, the one thing I always say is he makes players around him better because he's never had great line mates, yet they're always very productive, whoever's on his line.
I think the testament to Crosby is the fact that he's, because even superstars, there's one weakness to their game. I don't know if there's a weakness with Crosby.
Yeah. No,
I mean,
none.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that was my point, Mike, is he is maybe the most well-rounded player of all the ones that have been mentioned. I think the other interesting thing about Crosby, too, that doesn't get talked about enough is he's actually ridiculously physically strong.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't think people, like when guys talk about playing him, they talk about how difficult it is, but you don't really hear specifics about his game. It's sort of broad things. But I think one thing that gets overlooked is his literal strength in all aspects of his body, what he can do with it, how it's so hard to keep him off the puck. And what we've heard from other people in observations is that some players say it's difficult to play with him, mainly because they can't keep up with what he does. Right. Because he is so strong and he's so diverse in what he can do.
Yeah. Would we say, now this is terrible because it's an indictment, but his collection of wingers, if you're comparing it to the great players of all time, like it just seems like he's had Bossy had Trache, Gretzky had Curry. Like, who has Crosby really had? I mean, like, I don't want to demean,
but I mean, it's really true.
He just never had
Marian Hossa for a quarter of a season, and then it was Dupuis and Kunitz.
The other thing about the Penguins team that I always marvel at is, for as long as Malkin and Crosby have been there together, I've always felt, even through their championships, that they were one winger short. They have never had enough wingers for both of those players, and yet somehow they've continued to win, which to me just speaks to how, like, every season I've looked at that team and said, boy, if they just had one more score, boy, how good could they be?
It's funny, Kev, about Malcolm, just because you brought him up. Yesterday I was saying about the Leafs, I was saying, if you want to try and shut them down, you have to be active and physical and have your stick really in the way of everything they do. And Malkin single-handedly was doing that.
No, it wasn't single-handedly, Russ. I was just writing up my sort of game review.
But he did a lot. I mean,
he did a lot, but I mean, it was everybody. I mean, the Leafs lost every 50-50 puck battle yesterday. Yeah. The Penguins were quicker. They were knocking pucks out of midair. It was just, I mean, it was a clinic, and it was a 1-0 game until the empty netters. But now just a couple things here. I want to talk about, like, we're 2 weeks into the season, and two teams are winless. One, I think, is a little surprising. That's Florida, but we talked about Luongo being out, and I think that's definitely a factor. But they've only played 4 games, it's just a weird schedule. That like there's such a differential between Toronto's got 8, has played 8 games, and Florida's played 4. The other one, Kev, is Detroit, and they're 0-5-2. And let me sort of connect it with the coaching thing. I don't think Blashill's in trouble because Ken Holland said he's not. But, I think most other teams, if you start out 0-5-2 and you're going through a rebuild scenario, the coach might be in trouble.
Yeah, but I mean, for the first time, I mean, we've talked about this before, the fans were committed to the rebuild before the team was. The fans wanted the rebuild. This year, the team has committed to the rebuild, and by that they've pretty much acknowledged that that's what they're doing. And because of that, I think Blashill is very safe, and none of this is his doing. But the Red Wings are, from what I've seen, the worst team in the league. It's not even close. And that doesn't mean that the young players that they have aren't any good and aren't going to be good players. It just means they're really not close to being ready. Rasmussen, I think, is going to be a very effective, forward. He's 6'6", and he has skill, but he's lost right now just because he lacks the experience to kind of cope with what's going on there. And I think already the losing is starting to kind of affect, everybody, and it's they're slowly kind of rolling downhill. And they're going to have trouble scoring goals all year long. And they had 4 veteran defensemen out, and they're trying to play with young guys, and they're starting to get them back. Daly's back now. I think when Daly gets back and Mike Green, Daly is back, but when Green gets back to Kaiser, they'll be a little bit more competitive. But I think what you see is what you get. I think they're going to be, unless there's some great improvement that I don't foresee, they're going to be the worst team in the league. I don't see anywhere around.
I think the preseason for that, and unfortunately or fortunately, however the fans want to look at it, they're living up to that. And the goaltending's not getting better. I mean,
the goaltending's actually been fine. I mean, Jimmy.
No, I know, but at some point, I don't think it will be.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the goaltending is. Jimmy Howard's actually been good for.
Yes.
This is third season. He's played fine. He's a above average NHL goalie, but it doesn't.
There's nobody on the blue line there, though.
Yeah, no, and they just can't score. There's no confidence, and
when you're forced to play Roenick and Hicketts and Sulak, I mean, you're playing two guys with no experience at all.
Chalowski's playing, and like last night in a 2-1 game, they're very happy with where he is, but he's not quite ready. They didn't expect him to make the team. He did make the team. So they're trying to move their puck out of the zone. He puts it in Anthony Ciu's skates where he can't get it. The puck goes the other way. It's in the empty net. They got no chance for the tying goal. A veteran defenseman doesn't make that 50-foot pass that he did in that situation.
Now, I've seen a few teams play, come into Toronto and play, and I have to say, after watching them earlier in the week and then watching the second and third period last night after I got back from Toronto, I think the team that's in the biggest trouble right now is the Los Angeles Kings.
Yeah,
they are really, really slow. They finally scored a power play goal after going over 21 in the first few games of the season. They're just getting Jonathan Quick back, so maybe you can't fully, evaluate them because they've had Jack Campbell and Peter Budaj as their goaltenders. But Dustin Brown is out. Kopitar was out last night, ill. But even with all the guys out there, they're just not a fast team. And people thought, maybe Kovalchuk coming in would provide them a little more offense, but he was a non-factor in Toronto, and I don't know. Their window may have closed more than Chicago's window.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about that is Quick obviously cures a lot of woes. But you're absolutely right. Like the speed thing now, David Poyle just told me that this is the fastest he's ever seen the league, and he said, I thought last year was fast, but this year's even. He said, like, every team in the league is so fast. Well, not every team is so fast.
Right.
The Kings are, and you really see the difference. That is going to hurt him. And I think Kovalchuk, I thought he would help a little bit too. But
he's got 5 points. I don't think he's getting over 55 points. I didn't when they signed him.
Yeah.
But the surprising thing is he has no points on the power play. And I think the same as Carlson, they've had to adjust on the power play to try and work him in. And so far, it's not working.
Yeah. I agree.
Now, Russ, you were talking about the Flyers last night. They lost 6-3 to Columbus, and apparently, and the thing is, one of the things I thought was the strong part of their team, at least in terms of the future, was their defense, and with Provorov and with Gostisbehere and Sanheim, but they give up 6 goals to Columbus, and there apparently is just some panic and disorganization with their blue line.
Yeah, the blue line's really out of sync. It took a while last year for Provorov and Gostisbehere to get going, but this year they're not going. And Gostisbehere is offensively, and he's not playing bad defensively. Provorov is playing bad defensively, and the thing is, I don't think there's anything physically wrong with him. He's got a fair amount of shots. He seems to be skating right. I think the issue is with whatever the edict is about how the team should be playing defense, because he doesn't look as confident now. He's not jumping into the play as much as he used to. Last year at the second half of the year, he probably got 8 goals by jumping into the play. They desperately need his offense, and he's not giving them anything. And I think that's simply because there's an edict now for him to be more of a shutdown guy, and he can be, but the problem is not with Gostisbehere. And so, that's where, because he's still only a third-year defenseman, and I think that's been the part that's a little shaky. His confidence looks a little rattled, and there was a play yesterday where he was really slow getting from one side of the net to the other. I forget who got the goal for Columbus, but it really emphasized that. And while Robert Hagg's been chipping in offensively, which he did do a lot of early part of his career, and then they sort of changed his role. Defensively, that's starting to go backwards a little bit too, and especially in that game. And so, yeah, they've got some defensive woes now. Christian Folin was literally brought in to be the 7, and he's playing more than anybody thought he would play. And yesterday, when the game was still close, he just literally fell down. Like he just, tripped over, whatever ghost it was, and he fell down, and that was it. Columbus took the puck the other way, 2-on-1. They get an easy goal. And that just seems to be their luck. McDonald is, from what I understand, not playing just because he's not playing. And so they're really in a bind now.
Yeah, and we lost Kevin there for a sec.
Yeah.
Apparently from what I was following from you and Anthony and other Philadelphia reporters that I followed, that Pickard did not have the best of games.
No, he didn't have a great game either. But he's a guy that, like I said, he is not a unbelievable, physical kind of goalie or physically gifted kind of goalie. He's a positional goalie, so he needs a good defense, or he's not going to look good. And they didn't give him much of a defense either. He gave up a couple short side goals. I get it, but it wasn't all his fault. But he didn't look good either.
Kevin, I think I did that. I invited you when you dropped off. I invited you, so maybe log off and log back on. That'll get rid of it.
All right. Thanks.
Okay.
Bless me.
Bless you. Okay. Let's touch on a couple. Are you okay, Kevin? Stop.
I appear to be. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. No problem.
Now, Kyle in the chat room just calls him Christian Fallen. He fell yesterday.
Okay. Let's talk about a couple things that have been ongoing issues. One was and to get Kevin's thoughts on it. One is the reaction to the Mike Matheson hit on Elias Pettersson and the 2-game suspension. I mean, it seems to be bringing out the worst in some commentators, some who think that, this is the downfall of the league, that a hit like that would garner a 2-game suspension for a player. I like rough hockey as much as anybody, but he pile drived the guy into the ice. So, I think the argument of some people is that, well, he's 6'2" and 160 pounds, so he doesn't belong in the league until he's strong enough to be able to withstand that. But, I think, Kevin, we're in a league now, and we have had in the past a league that protects star players. And I think, that's probably going to be the wave of the future again, is that star players are going to get preferential treatment. I don't know if Pettersson is a star player yet, but to Vancouver fans, he is.
Yeah, for sure he is. Well, my take on that, that the hit was fine until he body slammed the guy. Like in any era, body slamming is, and, you have to make a differential, or you've got to decide. Like Matheson is stronger than that. That's an advantage that he can take advantage of. That's acceptable. That doesn't mean you get to slam the guy down on the ice. Like, I was fine with the suspension on it. I don't think it was.
No, but what Mike is saying, I've heard one prominent person say it, and I think I've seen more trumpeting it. Well, if he weighed more, Matheson wouldn't have been able to do that. Like, okay, I mean, why does that matter?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. That's what I'm saying. I just don't see what the issue is on that. Like, if when a guy's vulnerable, you shouldn't take advantage of that like that.
You know what it is, Kev? I'll tell you what's really causing the problem. And I brought this up the other day, and I used the analogy. Like, I'm a good guy. I don't get into trouble. But if I walked up to Eck and punched him in the face in the press box, people would be a little shocked. But they'd be like, I don't know what's going on with Russ, because he doesn't normally do that. And this is what's going on with Matheson, because he's not known for that, but he lost it because he couldn't handle covering Pettersson. Like, it was a problem for him.
You watch that play, and Pettersson undresses him about 20 seconds beforehand. He was ticked off, and we don't know what else had happened prior to that.
There may have been
everything up until he decides to body slam him is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with the way he played on the board. It's the whoomp. And, funny enough, I've started noticing that that's happening a bit with other players. Like, it's not uncommon to happen. Yeah. The difference is there's a belief going around, and we heard Nick Kiprios talk about it on Tim and Sid, of that's part of paying your dues when you come into the league. Well, sorry, Nick. People are paying money to see Elias Pettersson. They're not paying money to see Jim Matheson take out players that were not Jim Matheson, Mike Matheson.
I don't know, but I would pay money to Jim Matheson take out.
Yeah, you probably might, Kevin. That's true. But Mike Matheson to do that,
he throws a mean.
And that's the point. The NFL, has taken this to the point that they realize people want to see Aaron Rodgers. They want to see the quarterbacks. That it is a passing league now. They want these guys doing incredible things because that's what gets seats in the stands. That's what gets shown over and over again. That's what sells jerseys. The NHL has to do that too.
Yeah.
And protecting them doesn't mean no contact. It means don't body slam them. And that's the point.
Well, that's the thing, Peter. It's like I think it was on Wednesday. There was a big reaction to Charlie McAvoy taking out Johnny Gaudreau after Gaudreau undressed him, and McAvoy sort of whacked him down to the ice. And I'm not sure if he went for concussion protocol, but he was sort of shaking his head at the bench, and I think he eventually came back. But you know, I mean, okay, if you don't want to get walked as a defenseman, if you don't want to get undressed and embarrassed, then play better defense. Don't take it out on the guy after the fact because you suck or you sucked on that play. Just play better, and then you won't have to do that.
Seems so simple, but you know, it's when you're playing, I get it. Hockey is a very frustrating game. It is. And defense is the worst position for that because most of the time you're getting beat and you have to figure out how to recover and at least, you know, take the guy out of the play somehow so you're not letting your goalie get killed. And so it's a frustrating position. I get it.
Well, just to sort of add to what Peter said, because I think he's right on this as well. Like if you are an NFL fan today, what everybody's talking about this season is how exciting every game is. And this comes at a time when it's two-hand touch for the quarterback or flag football. They won't let you touch the quarterback. So on one hand, you know, we're complaining about the fact that we've lost old-time football and you can't go after the quarterback. On the other hand, we're saying, gosh, it's exciting to watch these games. Well, one of the reasons it's exciting is because quarterbacks aren't getting hurt because, you know, they're protecting them. And, you know, that's a part of it all. So, you know, you can't have it both in the NFL. And what I would say about the hockey situation is, you know, the league has kind of decided that they don't like the old way of protecting the stars of, you know, the tough guys around. We've sort of eliminated that. Yeah. So now the league feels it has to take care of and protect the stars. And so maybe this is just an extension of the evolution of the game and the loss of the tough guys that, you know, they're going to do it through suspensions.
Now, one of the few tough guys that's left is Tom Wilson, and he had a rather lengthy meeting with Gary Bettman yesterday, and there's a review of his 20-game suspension. Kev, I think it's going to get reduced a bit, maybe, you know, 3 or 4 games. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, people seem to think that, thinking that, you know, in order to, you know, kind of show that they're trying to be fair, that they'll, you know, give them a little reduction. But I don't know. Like, I thought this one was right on the money. I thought 20 games was appropriate. You know, he really clearly hasn't learned, and I think this is a suspension for his body of work. You know, not just the incident. That, you know, this has gone on now for a year. He seems to have learned nothing, and we're going to punish him for that as sort of a collective term. Because, you know, and the question I ask now is, what happens with his next one? You know, is it 30 games? Is it half season? Like, what is it? So if I'm Tom Wilson, I think this is a sign to me that I really have to alter how I play the game. And what's so frustrating is, you know, all he has to do is go through the core of the player instead of hitting them high, and everybody be talking about what a great hit that was. Like,
right, and it's possible for this type of player to change his spots because, you know, Matt Cook did it. Yeah. So Matt Cook was different. His infractions weren't as much body checks as they were cheap shots and undercutting and slew footing and everything else you could think of. Right. But he did step back a bit because he knew the next one was basically going to be the end of his career. Like Rafi Torres, that one last incident, that was it for him. Nobody was going to ever, you know, have him in the NHL again. So if he wants to stay in the NHL, and I'm sure the Caps do because they just signed him to an extension, he's got to learn how to play differently.
All right, let me ask a dumb but provocative question here, because I've been hearing this come up in regards to the suspension. What if the suspension had nothing to do with finances and no money at all, and it was just 20 games? Would the NHLPA even be fighting it? Because I don't think so. I think this is just about getting Tom Wilson some money back because he's losing $63,000 a game.
Right.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably something to that. I mean, that's, you know, the union's job is to protect their members, and you know, and protecting their assets is part of that. So when
does the union ever decide what Gary Bettman has actually done is correct? Like, when does that ever come into play?
Well, they wouldn't do that because they're gonna, you know, stand up for their union.
Right. They're going to stand up for the union, but their union is actually at conflict with each other.
Right.
Like, who's standing up for the victim?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And this goes back, and the one I think, you know, I hate using this as an analogy, but the one thing we saw back in that infamous night with Todd Bertuzzi and Steve Moore is no one ever came out and criticized Bertuzzi, who was a player. and the code or anything. No one ever came up and supported Steve Moore in his lawsuit. No one said a thing. That's all you need to know back then about how players look at things and how they feel things. There hasn't been a lick of a comment looking back in history about it by players. They simply don't talk about it. And they know there's a huge conflict there.
Yeah.
And it is probably the weirdest thing ever in how you look at it in terms between a league, the role of players to each other, the role of players to the league and the rules, and the violent nature of part of the sport. It's bizarre.
Yeah. Mike Modano one year addressed that exact issue. I can't remember exactly how it came down, but I remember he said that essentially what you did, that, you know, there is a conflict of interest because he was the victim, I believe, as I recall the story. And I think he came out and talked about that very aspect of it, and how, you know, he was a member and he was wrong too. So how could you be representing the guy who, you know, did this to me, essentially?
Yeah.
Now, the other ongoing story, and yesterday I brought it up, and Act is trying to avoid any William Nylander talk, but I think it's fascinating because it's the only, you know, right now, and it's not a holdout, it's a contract impasse, but you don't really see often, Kev, a general manager flying halfway across the world to meet with. And he didn't even meet with the agent. He met with William Nylander and with his dad, Michael Nylander. Louis Gross apparently was not in Zurich for this meeting, and there's been sort of scant information that's come out after it. But the general gist was, you know, Kyle Dubas went all the way there to say, you know, he's part of their plans. Our plan is not to trade you. But there was no flexibility, no budge on a long-term deal in terms of the amount that Nylander and his camp want. And now all of a sudden the focus has shifted to maybe a bridge deal, but conspicuously, and I don't know if one has to do anything with the other because Nylander wasn't playing last night, but all of a sudden a lot more scouts were showing up to Leafs-Penguins game last night. Like 4 teams had 2 scouts, which is unusual. And you know, and now you can see the road where maybe, even though Dubas is saying we don't plan on trading you, well, they need to get him under contract. You know, maybe the trade option is more likely now. What do you think?
Yeah, well, maybe, but I just, you know, I thought it was the right move by Dubas. You know, one of the reasons why players said they always say they're glad they have agents is because, you know, they take the brunt of the arguing, and they feel you have fewer hard feelings. But I think when you're in these situations, hard feelings develop. And I thought it was worthwhile for Dubas to go over there and do just exactly what you laid out and said, look, you know, we're still thinking you're going to be a great part of this team, and we're still planning for what we're going to do when you come back and all that. I mean, this is just business and so forth. And, you know, at least make sure that the relationship is still there. Like, they didn't need Louis Gross to do probably what he was trying to accomplish.
Right.
And, you know, the one thing though that I would like to point out, like if it seems to me teams never use their leverage. Like, they have the leverage here. You know, he can't go to another NHL team and he wants to play in the NHL unless they agree to it. I mean, you know, can they risk him not playing this season? I would say yes, they can.
Yeah.
You know, it's not desirable.
But I think it's a longer term risk than that, Kev, because I think if let's say it goes to the point where he doesn't play this season, well, you still got the same problem going into next season. And I don't think with his father the demands change. Like, he doesn't need the money.
Yeah, but the clock doesn't move. He's still an RFA.
Problem. He still doesn't have a contract.
Sure.
So next year there could be a team overseas that say, "Hey, you know what, William? We'll give you a couple $1 million," and he might just take it.
He might, but you know, he doesn't want to play there. Like, I think you can't
want to play there. We don't know in another year what he'll feel like.
Well, I think if it comes to that and you feel strongly about it and you got a good team without him, I think you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, I mean, There was a report earlier in the week from Igor Orenko, a Russian reporter, who was talking about Omsk, Ivangard Omsk having Nylander's rights, and Bob Hartley's the coach there, and apparently has some relationship with Michael Nylander, which is probably the reason why the rumor popped up. And then he came out yesterday and said, no, it's not going to happen. We have, not that we have no interest, but it's just he poured cold water on it, and he's practicing with an Austrian team, and he's been skating in Sweden. So in trying to stay in shape. But yeah, I mean, the focus here is the NHL. It's the question of him wanting what he thinks is the deserved big piece of the pie based on what he's done so far. And that's where, I mean, maybe the comments of Dubas about getting them all signed were ill-advised and something that a young general manager shouldn't do. But I still think it's possible, but I think it's going to end up being a bridge, which is what Russ and I have thought it was going to be for 3 months.
Yeah, it's just, if it's going to be a bridge, though, how long do you wait until it is a bridge? Like, even though Kev's right and they can live without him, once you sign that bridge, you're really only getting 1 more year out of him because you're going to trade him the next year.
Well, that's the thing, Kevin.
I think I'm trading the player before I even worry about the bridge. To be honest,
and that was the point I made. Russ and I were talking off air about this a couple days ago. I think that if they sign a bridge deal, it's the first chapter in the book of Nylander leaving Toronto, because I don't think apparently there was tough negotiations with Nylander and his father and Louis Gross on the entry level deal about the bonuses. And now there's tough negotiations on this contract, and he deserves to get paid. He's had 2 60-point seasons, so he deserves to get paid and paid well. But do you think that the Leaf organization wants to go through this again in 2 or 3 years? I mean, I think that if they get fair value and they get a defenseman that they really need, I think that's going to end up being what they end up doing.
Well, this is the way I would view it. I think you got to explore all your options. Sure. And by that, you got to see what the value is of him out there. You got to at least know what you could get for him. So I would consider, listening to trade offers, but I don't think there's any reason to panic. We still have several weeks before the deadline. And, it's hard to set out when you're a young, talented player like he is. And, they have a little bit of leverage. I would just sort of let it play out and see what happens. And he clearly wants to play in the NHL. He doesn't want to play in the KHL. He wants to play with the best players. So
here's the other thing. There's another domino in this, because, there was an article that came out recently within the last month that said, hey, the Jake Gardiner contract extension talks are supposed to start soon. Are those going to be stalled until Nylander's figured out, or are they just going to move on to Jake Gardiner and not worry about Nylander?
Russ, I don't think there is going to be any Jake Gardiner contract talks.
I think that might change now.
Well, it might, but the feeling is, because Pat Brisson is Gardner's agent. They talked about price point back in July, and Brisson was in Toronto this week. Other reporters are reporting that he was, and maybe that has something to do with Gardner. But he was talking to other teams about other players. But the thing is that I don't think that with Marner and Matthews that they can afford Gardner unless he takes a severe hometown discount. He can make $6.5 to $7 million. He's the second biggest plum on the free agent defensive market.
So, I mean, I think what everyone has to really understand about the Nylander situation, the Gardner situation, what's going to happen with Marner's and what's going to happen with Matthews, is that by signing John Tavares, you presented an awesome acquisition that you took to make the Leafs a dominant team. But you also took a position of establishing value across the board where other players are going to be.
Right.
Within that organization. If you can, and remember, this first thing happened. The first time this really happened was when Gretzky had that huge deal back in the in the 90s, and he wasn't quite producing in the same ways. Well, Gretzky's making $6 million. Well, how come I'm not, and I'm producing the same points, right, or more?
Right.
And this is the same thing that we're going to get to. You're valuing Tavares in his 78 points or whatever he had last year at $11 million. And now you're valuing my 60 points at only $6 million.
Yeah,
Like,
but
this,
there's a differentiation. There's
right?
a differentiation between UFA and RFA, and that's what teams are going to hold the line on.
Yeah, and exactly. And this and it's not that there's anything wrong with signing Tavares. It's not that anything wrong with how you value players. What's the problem is that you're going to have a harder time finding agreement on the middle ground because of that. And you get into situations like this. And something's going to give. I just like Matthews is going to get, he might get more than McDavid simply because he's in Toronto. Like, he just might. Like, it's not out of the realms of possibilities because what he's doing right now is insane. And it might have nothing to do with who his line mates are. He just might be coming into what people believed he could be, a true generational talent above and beyond all others. And that's going to cost a lot of money.
Well, just to bring it to Winnipeg, Peter, is that what's going on in terms of that the price point that they paid on Wheeler? Is that going to be the same effect as Tavares in Toronto when it comes to Line and Connor and all these other guys?
Yeah. If and Line had a very good game last night. Wheeler is playing okay. And I think, it's really interesting. Well, if you're valuing Wheeler at age 32 at $8.25 million, what are you supposed to pay Line who, if he gets 45 goals again? Right? These things have an effect, and you have to know that.
And this is the interesting thing, Kev, and I've heard the little bit of speculation about this in Toronto regarding Matthews, and maybe the same thing will happen with Line. We've seen players coming out of entry level like Crosby, like Taves and Kane, take 5-year deals or be offered 5-year deals, and it's sort of it's good and bad for both sides in the sense that they're not locking them up for 8 years, but they're locking them up for 5 at a lesser amount. And for the player, for the team, they can pay him a little bit less and fit everybody in. But for the player, he's a UFA at 26 or 27, and he can get that 8-year deal if there's an 8-year deal eligible in the new CBA. He can get that 8-year deal at age 26 and 27 into his 30s. So that might be sort of the compromise for Line, for Matthews, for Marner, in all these situations.
I think they're going to all want 8-year deals because of the uncertainty moving forward. That's kind of how I look at it. But, with regard to Gardner, too, like I was just looking at the cap-friendly thing. And obviously the Matthews contract is going to cause problems with or without Gardner. And, it's still a matter of whether they can fit absolutely everybody in there. I mean, they could have, obviously, without Tavares, but that changes the price of poker in Toronto. And, they're going to have to – I'm sure they're, thinking, well, we'll have to have an entry-level defenseman next year. Hainsey will be gone. Right. But it's not a big leap from $4 million to $7 million for Gardner. Like, you're talking $3 million increase.
Which is Hainsey's salary.
That's exactly right.
And so they bring in Timothy Liljegren, their first-round pick from a couple years ago.
That's what I'm thinking, they're thinking. So, like, I do think they'll talk to – I don't know why they wouldn't try to make, Gardner work. He's still an integral part. Everybody knows what his shortcomings are, but he also, brings some important elements to attacking Maple Leafs team. So, no matter what they sign Nylander for, it's going to be hard with all the, they just have a lot of talented players.
Well, the one thing I can say with, I think, great with confidence with the cap room, even after Nylander is signed, that they have before the deadline, they're going to be a team that adds a lot. They can. Sure. And this is a team that thinks that they can win now, and this is their one opportunity before they have to sign these other guys to long-term extensions. If they have $5-6 million under the cap, whoever's out there is rent-a-players if they think they're a good fit. I think that Dubas and Babcock are going to say, let's load up for a playoff run because they have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, and I think that's how Dubas will be judged in his first year. I mean, his ability to go out and get that, 20-minute defense-first defenseman.
Well, then everybody has failed, Kev, because right now, since Brendan Shanahan's been there, they haven't been able to do that.
Well, but they've never had a team like this. I mean, this is
no, I know, but they've been looking for that player the whole time.
No, yeah, but this is different because now, before I think they were looking for a guy long-term fix.
Yes.
Now they would accept a short-term, rental player, just as Mike spelled out. I mean, because boy, what a difference it would make. Every time I watch that team now, I think, okay, plug in a 20-minute guy, Murthat, somebody like that who, thinks about defense, doesn't worry about moving up the ice, and just making to a third of the game to have one guy back there that all he's concerned about is keeping that puck out of our zone. Like, what a difference it would make on that Toronto team.
Yeah, Alex Edler has been a name that's mentioned. Yeah. We've got Tyler Myers in Winnipeg, although they're a contender, so I don't think they're going to move them. But yeah, there are UFA defensemen out there that would really help them. And if they could move Hainsey down to the bottom pairing and put one of those guys up into their top four, they'd be a markedly better defense. But anyway,
keep away from Edler. That's who I want the Jets to pick up to shore up the left side, because after Morrissey, it's pretty ugly.
Yeah.
A 1-for-1 Gardner for Myers makes so much sense. We could only dream. Okay, guys, great show. We'll be back on Monday with another edition of the HockeyBuzzcast. For Kevin Allen, for Peter Tessier, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching. And remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.